Hello, I'm Howie Sheriff, and welcome to another fun and informative You Call This Yoga internet TV show where people are calling in already. Gosh, we just pushed the play button and already people are calling in. So I'll invite viewers and listeners to call in at 919-518-9773. Viewers, you can Skype in at Computers 2K Voice, or you can join the conversation on the chat box by logging in. I'm Howie Sheriff, the founder and director of You Call This Yoga, a 501c3 nonprofit in Raleigh, North Carolina that brings yoga to the physically challenged and underserved, seeking to improve their lives with this age-old art. Along the way, we have our show and we interview leaders in our community and the nation who are providing accessible yoga to the world. Today we have a pleasure of a friend, yoga teacher, good egg, and yoga 12-step recovery yoga teacher, Celia Hartnett. Celia is a clinical social worker in Raleigh and Cary area who is providing services for her clients in recovery as well as their own personal issues outside of recovery. Celia has trained as a yoga teacher and, similar to myself, has had some physical challenge. So when we talk about recovery can be in many forms, but it's also what we're doing along the way. During the show, we'll be sharing pearls of wisdom that Celia has shared with me, as well as we'll be honoring our sponsor, Neomond, later on. I want to thank all the folks that have been tuning in at 9:30 during the month of March while I teach somewhere else after the show. We will resume at 10 o'clock in April. However, just to throw another little curve, we won't be on the air next week, so you'll have the luxury of viewing our archive shows. Or is that archive shows? Either way, next week, no show. The week after that, 10 o'clock, with David Emerson, a pioneer in yoga for trauma. And I will have a special co-host, Barbara Vosk, who has studied with David. But enough of the future, back to the present. And let's bring on Celia. Hello, Celia.
Hello, Howie. Good to see you.
Yes. Actually, we don't really see each other except out of the corners of our eyes. We are sitting next to each other.
Yes.
So we do have to be mindful of what, or especially I say.
Yes.
Celia, tell us about, first, your foray into social work. What inspired you to follow that career path?
Well, that's a good question, and one that people frequently ask me. I had been working in television, news of all things, and got into my own program of recovery and found that I was passionate about working with people who had addiction issues, and switched from television news to substance abuse counseling, and I did that for about 12 years. And then decided to get a graduate degree, so I got a master's in social work and started a private practice. So it was a different path, I would guess, than how most people get into social work.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you mentioned your path to recovery, which seems to have preceded the shift towards social work. Now, I envision if you've been around people, you've been observing conditions and situations as a news person.
Yes, it was working in television news in Wade County in North Carolina was a wonderful experience. I learned a lot about North Carolina. I had just moved here, in 1980. It was a wonderful way to get to know the state. I was very privileged to meet lots of people from all walks of life, and I enjoyed it. I was younger, much, and really enjoyed the excitement of television and met folks I would never have met otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a great time in my life that I really learned a lot.
Mm-hmm. And how did that television career translate into your dealings with the community once you left the television world?
Well, I benefited from being aware of the resources that were available in White County and throughout the Triangle. I benefited from knowing some folks, knowing that there were ways for people to get help that often people might not have access to. And one of the things I love about social work is that the goal, in my mind, the purpose of social work is to help people who are disenfranchised,
Mm-hmm.
to help people who don't necessarily have the ability to access resources for many, many reasons. And so there was a nice meld there between what I had been doing and what I was doing. I also, along the way, found myself needing some help for substance abuse addiction, substance use that had gotten me into a lot of trouble. So I had started my own path in recovery. And that's also a situation where I got to meet many, many people I would not have otherwise met. And have been very privileged to be a person in long-term recovery since 1981. So there was another melding there of my experience as a recovering person and substance abuse counseling, and then eventually social work, and then eventually yoga. So it all kind of flowed or evolved as the years went by, which they do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love to venture, if you're comfortable with this, in some of the early years of your recovery process or even prior to that, and what tools were available, if any, in your mind for this process, and how did you start adapting your life or your perspective or your relationships towards a recovery mode?
That's a really good question too. I hate to say this because it sounds sort of like a stereotype or a cliche or a magazine title, but I was a teenage alcoholic, and I did begin drinking fairly young and using other substances as well. I didn't discriminate. I loved all substances. And when it became clear to me through a series of events that made my life pretty miserable that I needed help, I did start in a 12-step program. There were other resources available at that time, but not very many. And I stayed sober through the support and fellowship of the 12-step program, and became interested in addiction as an illness and the model that provides help to people through the medical model and through other ways of getting sober. And so that's been part of my quest. While I have been blessed with sobriety through a 12-step program, I know there are people who don't have that advantage, who haven't been able to access sobriety through a 12-step program. And so I've always been interested in additional ways to help people and how they might be able to get to the place where they achieve some abstinence from their drug or their process, so they could get some stability in their lives and get some freedom from addiction.
Mm. Yes, and when you were a teen and they were trying times and you were trying just about anything you can get your hands on, how was the community support structure? Did you feel as if you had to be in isolation, or was it something that there was support to be, quote, out about your issues? It's because it seems as if Y12SR now and 12-step programs, sad but true, are much more accepted.
Mm-hmm.
That is a common in our society.
It, it it was a very different world. I'm 60 years old, so when I was a teenager, it was the late 1970s, mid 70s, I guess. Too much math for me, but I got sober in 1981, so for years before that, what I was doing was, first of all, I was underage, so it was criminal behavior. I knew it was criminal behavior, and like most teenagers, I was very, very secretive. There also was no, or not very much publicity about recovery. Celebrities, movie stars didn't talk about how long they'd been sober. There were very few treatment centers. I was not aware of the treatment centers existing. It was a different world. It was culturally very different, and it was there was a great deal more shame about addiction. Certainly in my family, nobody would have been very happy about the fact that I was misusing alcohol and other drugs. I didn't have adults I felt I could discuss what was going on with me because I was underage and what I was doing was illegal. So it was very different than the environment we're in now. And I think the environment we're in now is much healthier, much provides much more access for people. Folks coming into treatment and into recovery are getting younger and younger, which is wonderful. I could have been diagnosed at 13 and had the same symptoms then that I did when I got sober. So we have a different mindset about it now, and we also are willing to use other modalities to help people get into recovery, which is also wonderful.
Viewers, listeners, feel free to capitalize on Celia's experience and wisdom in managing this disease. You can call it 919-518-9773, Skype, Computers 2K Voice, or the chat box by logging in. Want to encourage folks to remember we do not have a show next week, or also that we are returning to 10 o'clock the following week with David Emerson. Let's take a little break from the history of Celia's process and bring forward one of her pearls of wisdom so that viewers and listeners can start to get more grounded in their day.
We can close our eyes and take some deep breaths here with our hands upturned, surrendering to what is. This pose can also be done standing. It's very useful because we can practice this pose just about anywhere. It might not impress our friends and families or get us on the cover of a magazine, but it does help us live life on life's terms.
Hello and welcome to the Neomon Minute. If you're looking for a heart-healthy way,
we are just growing with our technology, so thank you for tolerating any little blips. We're working through them. We have just a little collection of cavemen here who are helping me through my limits of technology with Dropbox and Skype and other elements. So thank you. Celia was mentioning mountain pose. We believe that's the foundation of your practice, whether it's to start or to finish in meditation in a seated mountain pose. So you mentioned about resting the hands. I'm a big proponent of having the palms up, finishing or beginning with the end in mind, because theoretically when we're approaching meditation, we may have our palms up to help open our hearts and ground our base. Celia, any thoughts that you would like to add about mountain pose before we dwell back in your history?
I like the stability of mountain pose. I like the idea that I can sit or stand and be present in the moment, and that it's a starting place and an ending place. It has a nice balance to it. I think it's useful for me to remember to sit and stand with stability as I go through the day. So it's a very useful pose. Again, not glamorous, not exciting, but very useful.
Wonderful. I can appreciate from my own perspective of how frequently I'm trying to sit in mountain. I believe that my body has some irregular shapes to it, not because of working out, but because of traumas
Yes.
and arthritis.
Yes.
Celia and I both have the luxury of having irregular spines.
Yes.
Uh, she has been dealing with this for decades and is actually going through an interesting process now of weight loss and other trainings to help give her greater connection with her body, something that's often lost in an addiction process. And I, too, have had this chronic arthritis, malpositioning of my spine, well, not malpositioning, but malshaping. And consequently, I'm perpetually looking for neutral, and it's a fleeting element. Anybody out there pursuing neutral every once in a while or all day long?
Yes.
So consider the mountain pose. I strongly encourage that. Coming back to Celia and some of her path, when did you decide to become a yoga teacher?
Well, I when I turned 50, I got crazy and decided to do triathlons. No good reason. Is there a good reason? I wanted to, the usual reason we do things. And I did some sprint triathlons and really benefited from the training, but also needed a counterbalance to what was fairly aggressive aerobic training. And so I went back to yoga, which I'd tried many years before, and enjoyed it immensely and felt more drawn to it than I did triathlons, which is probably good. And in the process of taking classes different places and my own home practice, I decided there was a lot about yoga I wanted to be able to relay to other people, especially to my patients. And so I became a yoga teacher and started the process of learning about how to teach yoga, and have really enjoyed my own self-study and learning about this wonderful ancient art and how it can be helpful to so many folks.
Wonderful. And when you were deciding to become a yoga teacher, how did your physical condition and potentially even your recovery process influence where and how you became a teacher?
Well, I am limited. My spine, much of my spine is fused and held together with some hardware. And so there are poses in yoga that it would be very inadvisable for me to do. Any kind of inversion that was significant, and more intense yoga practices are not recommended for what I have going on in my body. And so I needed a place where there was a great deal of acceptance that I could become a teacher despite these limitations. And I found a place in Santa Barbara, White Lotus Foundation, where the two teachers were extremely open to working with me and working with people who have physical limitations, and believing in me and my ability to become a teacher, not in spite of my limitations, but because of my limitations, that they would allow me to be beneficial to people who might otherwise think yoga was outside of their abilities. And so I went to Santa Barbara and I did an immersion training at White Lotus Foundation and found it to be a wonderful experience. And I found some different ideas about yoga, what yoga is, how we live yoga, and how yoga is inclusive, regardless of what people's physical bodies might look like, that enriches and informs my practice today. So that was wonderful.
Ah. Thank you, Celia.
You're welcome.
I too have had some physical challenge over the years with a hip replacement and neck fusions. I found that for me, my yoga practice was best accommodated by laying on the floor in slow, easy movements where I could explore my body. For folks who may have physical challenge, it's not all about sun salutation or twisting and contorting. Those are just processes that start your body awareness to ultimately free you up to meditate. And we'll be talking more about meditation. In my path over the years, when I started studying roughly 20 years ago, I couldn't practice the way even a gentle class was going because of my tensions as a dentist or recreational athlete. Since that time, I've found that if I go slow and low, then I'm able to access areas in subtle ways that do give me openings of areas that have been constricted and greater awareness of my body and ultimately my mind and my heart. So I'll invite students to explore with some degree of safety. You don't have to go wild and say, oh, I can do this, therefore I can do that, but to see where your successes are. When we're trying to deal with an addiction, it's really trying to deal with something that we're struggling with and how can we be successful. I'm not an expert at this, but I sense that that's valid. Teachers, too, there are ways that we all struggle and that we have our go-to processes. So I'll invite you to explore beyond the process that you're used to and to consider reaching out to Celia or people in the 12-step realm as to how to gain more sensitivity to those that are dealing with traumas and life's struggles. Celia, where would you suggest people start to learn about Y12SR?
Well, I guess nowadays the best place would be the website, to go to y12sr.com and learn about the yoga of 12-step recovery. It has a wonderful history. It is something that is growing around the country and even throughout the world. It is really about the process you were talking about, where our goal is to become internally aware of what's going on in our bodies. That is something very important to people, especially early in recovery, but very important to folks who might not have addiction issues, but have been living in their heads. I know for me, with what was going on with my body, I certainly used alcohol and other drugs to self-medicate. And I know that lots and lots of people who are having problems with addiction do that. And many of us find ways to be distracted from what's going on in our bodies. It might not be through active addiction. It might be through anything that distracts us from our bodies. So when we start with yoga, when we start with Y12SR, we're not starting with the goal of a pose that someone else demonstrates. We're starting with the goal of discovering and exploring in a safe space what's going on in my body. How do I feel when I move certain ways? How does it affect the rest of my body when I move certain parts that might be painful or have tension? How do I learn to move and live and go through life without substances, without distractions, without checking my cell phone every 20 seconds, without going on shopping sprees? How do I live in the present moment inside my body? And that's a challenge for many of us, and especially people who first stop using drugs and alcohol. How do we live life on life terms? Y12SR takes the wonderful gift of yoga and combines it with the 12 steps of the 12-step programs and gives us a path through life.
Yes, and yoga is also in a parallel or similar mode of providing a life science, a mode of a path through life. That's fascinating. You also mentioned other habits or processes that are also in the realm of addiction. Yet we often might think of a 12-step recovery as a drug and alcohol mode. How can people who have non-chemical addictions benefit from Y12SR if that's open, Or do you know of other ways or other groups that people with non-chemical addictions can approach yoga?
That's a great question. Y12SR is open to anyone who considers themselves an addict. We don't ask you to qualify what what you're addicted to, and to family members and friends and loved ones who have who are active in addiction or in recovery. There are many things we can get addicted to, and the 12 steps have been applied to many, many, many areas in addition to substance use and abuse. So if you consider yourself a shopping addict or a food addict or any of the processes, gambling, any of the things that we get a charge from, we get endorphins from, we get excited about, that make our lives miserable, that we can no longer manage. Addiction is continued use despite negative consequences. So you can apply that to whatever it is in your life that you might be questioning. And if you want to come and explore a Y12SR meeting, you are more than welcome. Nobody asks you to qualify. Nobody says what's your substance or why are you here. It's a very open and inclusive program by design. And that's wonderful because people can come and check us out. And what are you about? And, is this a place where I will benefit? And if the answer is yes, you'll be welcomed.
Lovely. And this is one of those funny things where you sometimes talk in a different mode as someone else did something. Well, I did go to a 12-step program once to support a friend. It was in California.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very skeptical because he wasn't a Christian, and there seemed to be a high emphasis on the Christian faith in the meetings. Mm-hmm. And that already took his questioning mind one step further into being skeptical about it. And I could appreciate that, but he was a skeptic to begin with, so he was looking for something there.
Yeah.
However, there is this tendency for people that aren't in the yoga realm or potentially in the 12-step realm to perceive this as a cult or a religion-based mode that has the potential to do more than help you recover. How do you see yoga and 12-step negotiating these myths or perspectives?
Well, it is a challenge. We do live in a predominantly Christian culture, and that culture has overlays into whatever else we do. And there's a gap between the theory of 12 steps, what's presented theoretically, and how it's practiced. So theoretically, a person of any or no faith would be able to participate in a 12-step program or in a yoga program. However, because we're people and we bring our culture with us, this overlay of our religion, which is predominantly Christian, tends to work its way into 12-step meetings and can give people pause sometimes to consider yoga. I would encourage people to be more open, if they can be, to the theory of 12 steps and the theory of yoga, which is that everyone is welcome, that they don't need to have a particular faith or any faith at all. And that would mean they have to do battle with what might be the cultural elements that they find. And that can be difficult. Early in recovery, we want support and comfort. We don't want to have to do battle with philosophical problems. But if you look at what is written in Alcoholics Anonymous, the original 12-step programs literature, and if you look at what yoga presents us, I hope you can see that there is not a requirement for any particular faith. The other thing that I think is useful is, as folks grow in their recovery, they can bring to recovery in their area, in their culture, a more open-minded approach and become part of the solution. And I think that's what Nikki Myers, the founder of Y12SR, did, was take some of the challenges that people find in 12-step programs and work very hard to overcome them in Y12SR, to be inclusive, to be open, to be willing to say all folks are welcome here, and you don't have to have a certain substance addiction or a certain religion to be part of the program. Of course, once things become popular and come out into the world, they can be changed, and we all put our own spin on things. I would say to anyone who went to a 12-step meeting or who went to a Y12SR meeting, if you were not comfortable there, don't give up on that program. Try somewhere else and talk about your discomfort and find people who want to help you access what is true and real and good about those programs versus someone who might need a more of a controlling approach to them, shall we say.
Valid, because the meetings are made up of people, and people are similar but different in different locations, dealing with similar but different issues.
Yeah.
So it's a little after 10 Eastern when we usually have the show, and the folks who are joining us now because they may not have been able to at 9:30 or 10 o'clock is when they're used to joining. Good news is that we return to our 10 o'clock slot next month. However, we are off the air next week for personal reasons. So we welcome all the new viewers that have come back to the show at 10 instead of 9:30 today. It's time for a different cult and culture. It's called Middle Eastern cuisine. So let's take a nice little trip to Neomond, our sponsor for the week.
Way of eating, then tried the Mediterranean diet. And for 40 years, Neomond has been bringing this traditional way of eating to the Triangle. Let me tell you some of the benefits of eating with Neomond. The Mediterranean diet reduces the risk of heart disease.
Welcome back. There's a sunspot today, and apparently it's affecting all of our broadcasting and other myths that may come up along the way.
Yes.
I apologize for any disruptions. Let me share some about Neomond.com.
I'm going to talk about something else. I'm going to put
Okay. So here we are back on the show, and soon Amnon will do some magic for us to share our Neomond Minute. Thank you for tolerating our technical challenges. Hopefully you still have internet. All right, Neomond. Yum. The olive oil the antioxidants, the cholesterol reducing element, the improved mental focus with za'atar, the delicious spices.
The baklava.
Yes, so if you go to neomon.com, under Explore, you'll find our recipes.
Mediterranean diet.
Some, I have no idea what's
Okay.
going on.
Well,
Hold it.
Neomon Minute. If you're looking for a heart-healthy way of eating, then try the Mediterranean diet. And for 40 years, Neomon has been bringing this traditional way of eating to the Triangle. Let me tell you some of the benefits
Gremlins.
of eating with Neomon. The Mediterranean diet reduces the risk of heart disease by lowering the level of LDL, the bad cholesterol. It has been shown to help in the fight against cancer. Women who eat the Mediterranean diet supplemented with extra virgin olive oil and mixed nuts have shown a reduced risk of breast cancer. What is eating Mediterranean? Eating primarily plant-based foods such as fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and nuts, replacing butter with healthy fats such as olive oil, using herbs and spices instead of salt to flavor foods. Getting plenty of exercise, for example, maybe yoga? As with any diet, always consult your doctor first. Go online to neomon.com to see the healthy options you have to choose from, or just stop by in person. Thanks for watching the Neomon Minute.
welcome back. Before our foray into cyberspace and sunspots and our enjoyment of Neomon, Celia was talking about Y12SR and her experience and introduction to Nikki Myers. So I'm going to ask Celia to share a little bit more about that, as well as any thoughts that she had along the way.
Yeah, I would encourage people to try Y12SR for a variety of reasons. And I have had the pleasure of meeting Nikki Myers, who is the founder of Y12SR. She's a wonderful woman. She brings a breath of fresh air to recovery and to yoga. She's very comfortable using her own story as a way to demonstrate how yoga can help people in recovery. She was very active in training leaders, myself included, so we could learn more about Y12SR, how this yoga of 12-step recovery could be an adjunct to people. It is not in any way contradictory to anything you learn in a 12-step program or in a treatment program for addiction. It is an adjunct, as I said, that complements just about everything I know in recovery and brings us together in a different way. So we move from what is basically a cognitive-based approach to recovery, the 12 steps, into a somatic-based approach, our bodies, where we live, how we feel, how we move, and how we tolerate strong emotions after we give up the substances that had helped us with those strong emotions. Nikki is very open and honest about her own relapse when she had a good time in recovery, a good period of time in recovery, and how yoga helped her tremendously, and how bringing together yoga and 12 steps was the thing that helped her sustain recovery from addiction. And I think that that's very forward-thinking, it's very progressive, and as I said, the goal is to be very inclusive. So you don't have to give up anything or stop doing anything to get involved in Y12SR. It complements whatever you are already doing in recovery.
Celia mentioned the concept of going from the mind to the body. We're going to move towards her next pearl, with hopefully no sunspots, and share some of how Celia starts to engage her body.
Practicing yoga poses when we're calm helps to prepare us so that we can use them if we become agitated or distressed. For people in recovery, one of the biggest stressors we face is a desire to drink or use other drugs when we have cravings. Yoga postures can help us regain our stability and realize that drinking and using are not healthy options. A very useful pose that can help reset our nervous system is a forward fold. This simple pose involves inhaling our arms upward, and then as we exhale, slowly bending forward, one vertebrae at a time, dropping our heads and our arms to where we feel comfortable. We inhale, our arms back up, bring our hands together, exhale into prayer pose to regain a sense of calm.
Let's bear in mind, though, that if you have high blood pressure or ocular issues,
Yes.
or any sort of respiratory compromise where you must be open and upright, that to consider only coming down halfway, using chair arms for support, or a tabletop encounter. Something that you can ground and experience the potential of resetting your nervous system. Speaking of setting nervous systems, I've had chronic arthritis. Celia's had more rods than you can count put in our spine, and both of us have been dealing with some sort of chronic discomfort. Celia, what is some of your go-to for dealing with your chronicity?
Well, there is a wonderful concept, excuse me, that I find in both Y12SR and 12-step programs, and that's the idea of one day at a time. I don't know how I'm going to feel tomorrow. I don't need to focus on how I felt yesterday. I can be present in this moment the way we are taught in yoga and the way we're taught in recovery, and experience what I'm experiencing without the anxiety of the past or the anxiety of the future. Focusing on my breathing helps me to defocus on areas that are painful, knowing that I do have movements I can engage in that don't increase the pain, helps me relax, helps my mind relax, and that helps my body relax. This wonderful concept of being in the present moment opens up a world of hope for people who suffer from chronic pain, because we don't have to become attached to the idea that we've always hurt, we hurt now, and we're always going to hurt. There are many beautiful similarities between yoga and what yoga philosophy is and recovery philosophy. And so this idea that right now, today, I can identify places in my body that feel good as well as places that don't feel so good is very helpful to me. And it's a beautiful concept to help us deal with any problem, physical or otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Our healing is a gradual process. It's not a light switch, and it's a dimmer in a sense that might get more radiant or might get a little darker each day or throughout the day. I know for myself, I sometimes lay down during the day, get my palms turned up so I can tuck my shoulder blades underneath me, and in a sense, I'm having my own mini shavasana or rest pose, trying to settle my nervous system, because I come to appreciate that I have chronic stuff, and even physical issues can lead to emotional issues. Chronic pain for me was rather depressing for quite a bit of time, and I was seeking to get away from that state. For me, when I wanted to become a yoga teacher, I did investigate the foundation that Celia attended to, and I was about to go. And I was negotiating the idea of being away from my comfort of home for a month. I didn't relish that because I was very home connected. Fortunately, I found a teacher nearby named Nancy Gilbert in the Tidiba School of Yoga, where I was able to be homeschooled and actually trained with a focus in adaptive yoga. It appears that the White Lotus Foundation also has that perspective in helping folks with similar issues or comparable issues of some physical challenges. Teachers, if you know of any other programs that are specially adapted for students or advanced learning in helping people with recovery or physical challenges, we welcome that. Students, if you have questions about Celia's path or recovery path, you can type them in or Skype or call. For folks that are tuning in, no show next week, and we return on April 11th with the fabulous David Emerson doing pioneer work on yoga and trauma. We're going to come back to Celia and ask her to clarify a little about her experiences with Yoga 12-step and some of the affirmations that are done with that meeting process and what she knows about yoga for warriors or military and how she sees that, or just the idea of affirmations. How does that fit in a social way?
Well, when we repeat things, our mind starts to believe us, our brain starts to believe us. And there are not too many positive affirmations you can think of about being an addict or an alcoholic. Rarely are those words preceded by lovely adjectives about how great it is. So many people come into recovery feeling pretty bad about themselves and having a deep sense of failure, not even low self-esteem, self-hatred for having what has felt like an inability to control something they should be able to control. In Y12SR, as in other recovery programs, there's an affirmation that today, through maintaining or working toward maintaining abstinence, you are a person of value. And that is very uplifting for people who have come to recovery or Y12SR from a very dark place. There's a saying in 12-step programs, nobody comes in on a roll, which is true. We don't go seeking help for addiction because life is great and we feel wonderful. So the affirmation that we are of value, we are of intrinsic value, and we can establish that sense of self through the breath, through an acceptance of our bodies, through affirming that right now I am working toward the goal of recovery, is very, very uplifting, as I said, and very different for people to come someplace where you're welcomed, where you're wanted, where you're told you can do this, whether it's a yoga pose or a life of abstinence, one day at a time, is a wonderful experience for folks who have not had those experiences very much in the recent past.
Interesting. Meetings can have their own personality based on the form and based on the people that are there and the leeway or philosophy of life that they have. How would you describe some of the atmosphere of the recent meetings that you conduct? What is a get-together like?
Well, the general format that I use at the place where I teach, which is Healing Transitions of Raleigh, which is a treatment center for women who are recovering, is that we have either about 45 minutes of discussion followed by about 45 minutes of yoga, gentle yoga that's accessible to everyone. And Nikki Myers has been very brilliant in her creation of this program and giving the leaders freedom to determine what's best for the folks they are meeting with. So other meetings might do things differently. The general format is that the time is split between discussion and asana, and that's adjustable based on what's going on with the group, what's going on in the community. The meetings that I am privileged to lead at Healing Transitions are a lot of fun. The women are early in recovery. They have had a long day. They have done some physical labor. They've done some learning in classroom settings. They've had dinner, and it's a chance to relax, do something we hope is nurturing and life-giving and perhaps less taxing than their day. They are wonderful women who are very curious about yoga, or very curious about recovery, and I find them to be tremendously receptive in looking at how can I help my body feel better? How can I feel better? How can I feel without substances? How can I get to a good place with who I am right now today? And I would say there's a joy attached to combining these philosophies. I am very blessed to have someone who's a leader with me, and she brings long-term recovery to the room. And yet we stay in beginner's mind, which is a concept that yoga and recovery share, which is we're here today, we're doing what you're doing one day at a time, we're happy to be here. So other meetings might have a different tone to them, but generally it's a celebration of abstinence and freedom from a life of misery.
And each teacher has their own style and little tidbits that they bring. Let's see what Celia brings to her class.
This next pose is one of my favorites, although it took a while to warm up to it. It is kind of silly, but I think it appeals to the child in all of us, and it has become a favorite at the place where I teach. It's called Lion's Pose, and it is really useful for stretching and exercising the muscles in our neck and head. It starts like this, with our hands up like paws of a lion. We take a big inhale, and as we exhale, we open our eyes wide, raise our eyebrows, and roll our eyes to look upward, while sticking out our tongue. It only sounds complicated. There's an optional roar if you like. Let me show you. It goes like this. I'll do it again. You might have been laughing that first time around. You can see that it's a good exercise and it's good for a laugh. Lion's pose. Yeah, it's worth repeating. It really is.
We can get into it. It could be a whole sort of diaphragmatic breathing process, too. Eventually, you'll be roaring, hopefully in a positive way. So Celia brings good spirit and experience to her process. She's teaching around town, and there are certain formats for making these meetings more accessible. Celia, how does one pay for a meeting, or does one have to pay, and where does the money go if someone comes to a Y12SR class?
That is a great question. I'm glad you asked that, Howie. And I will say that there's a wonderful class Sunday evenings at 7:30 at Evolve Movement, which is in Raleigh. That was our first Y12SR meeting, and it's been going strong, and it's a wonderful place where folks gather. The meeting at Healing Transitions is considered an institutional meeting, so there's no collection of funds, there's no asking for voluntary donations. But when money is, that when people can donate, it's suggested that people donate. You don't have to give any money at all. What we say is you are more important than your money. And there's no basket passed. The basket's left for people to put money in if they're comfortable doing that. The money that is collected is shared evenly between the studio that's offering its space, for which we are always very grateful, and then a community organization that helps people who are disenfranchised to access yoga, and then to the leaders who are leading that group. So it's a three-way split, and it's a way to pay back or pay forward to all the agencies that are helping folks, to the studios, and to the leaders who spend their time and energy offering Y12SR to those who might be interested.
That's very kind. So, Yoga 12 Step for Recovery is open to anyone. It can be at no charge or whatever you feel you can donate. Do attendees often or also have the opportunity to serve in some other way? How can attendees make yoga active in their life outside the class?
Well, I believe, as in most yoga classes, we promote a home practice. We promote the idea of trying poses that we're comfortable with between Y12SR meetings. Certainly, everyone there is a support to the other folks there. There's a very strong group awareness and group support. People can meet outside of the Y12SR meetings and support each other. It's a community, and each group is considered a unique entity that is part of the recovery community and that offers support at other times as well. Certainly, we have folks who get very interested in yoga and even become yoga teachers. So that's a wonderful outcome as well.
I'm going to ask a little edgy question now. Saved it for the edge, but since you put it up on a tee for me. Sobriety is a process. Sobriety might seem something one can achieve quickly, but may not be able to sustain it. So how do you believe teachers of Y12SR should be vetted or postured so that they are authentic in sobriety? Because even the founder, Nikki Myers, talked about how she fell out of recovery twice before actually starting the foundation. What's your radical view on this?
Well, my radical view, with the idea of radical meaning going back to the roots, which is the meaning of radical, is that we can't give what we don't have. And that a leader ought to have some period of abstinence from whatever substance they were struggling with to be able to offer that abstinence or that clean time or that sobriety to someone else. And Nikki runs Y12SR, the other leaders run Y12SR as an honor program. So nobody asks your sobriety date, or nobody, gives you a breathalyzer check to see if you're sober. But we do ask that leaders have some period of time in recovery. I don't recollect, because I know it might have changed. I believe it's 6 months abstinence, but I could be wrong. But it's an honors program where you decide for yourself if you are sufficiently grounded and have enough abstinence to lead a meeting. I think mostly it's important that leaders can be honest among themselves and seek out the wisdom of other people in recovery and be open to suggestions about whether they are in a place to lead. And ideally, it would be a community where we could do that and we could talk about what had happened with us. But that's not necessarily always the case. Y12SR and the 12-step programs draw from a wide selection, a cross-culture, cross-selection of the population. So we are open to all kinds of people, and that's the fun of it and the challenge of it.
Yes. All sorts of walks of life, whether it's obvious or not. There's many of us struggling, trying to find a solution. How can people reach you if they have questions after today?
I would say the best way would be to go to my website, CeliaHartnett.com, and there's a way to email me from the website. I am more than happy to answer questions about my experience in recovery, Y12SR. If I don't know the answers to your questions, I will help you find them.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank a good friend, Celia Hartnett, who's been supportive of You Call This Yoga for years. She'll be at Yoga Fest at the Y12SR exhibitor booth.
Come see me.
Come see her. Bring her a beverage.
Non-alcoholic.
Of course. Unless we're fermenting in the back, I don't think we'll have any at Yoga Fest, which is on April 8th. Registration closes April 5th. We do have scholarships for those in need.
Yes.
Please reach out to me, Howie at youcallthisyoga.org. It'll be on our website. We also have archives of this show on the You Call This Yoga Facebook page under past events, as well as the Nissan Communications, where you're tuned in now, archives the on-demand page. Next week, no show. The week after, April 11th, David Emerson, special guest host, co-host, Barbara Vosk, a student of David's. Thank you for tuning in. We welcome your feedback. You can rate a show on the Nissan channel. Let's finish up by sitting up tall in our mountain pose, get our paws up, take a breath, and roar. Namaste.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section on nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Atomos.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.